Hey everyone, Tony D and Little Joan here with your second Hollywood hot take, Hollywoke hot take today. If you want to see the first one, you can only see it on Bitchute and Rumble, our other channels. So smash like and subscribe. Thank you for smash liking and subscribing. Please check out my books, including Wokistan, a novel, and Hollywoke, another novel, about some of the topics we talk about here. It's political satire, and of course the Pineys books 1 through 6, comedy horror in South Jersey. It's a lot of fun. Thank you for supporting the channel. Now, I'm going to try to talk about this on YouTube without getting flagged. As you know, I am still demonetized and I'm still talking to YouTube about it, and they still won't just delete the videos they can't stand. Despite the fact that they're not making any money anyway, or whatever. The copyright, according to them, a copyright claim doesn't impact your channel, so what's the problem? I couldn't tell you. But here's a problem. George Floyd, 1 year later, reflecting on the impact on black people, Hollywood, and America, which you would expect to see in New York Times or Washington Post or wherever, but here it is in Variety, ostensibly the premier entertainment thing about movies and TV shows. You know, they did this all through the Trump administration. Suddenly, Variety and Hollywood reporters reporting on politics because it's oh so trendy. And that's really, in my view, the only reason they report on it, because it becomes a trend, and then the trend turns into movies and TV shows and whatnot. But their takes on this is extremely, how should I put this? It's not so much one-sided, although it is. It's not one-sided because they believe in anything. It's one-sided because when you are in entertainment, you want as most people as possible to like you. So you take the most popular stance that you perceive. And so when you read the intro to this, you understand what the most popular stance on this is. Uninterrupted and unrelenting for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, the world seemed to realize what black people had been talking about for the last century when George Floyd was murdered a year ago by the now former police officer and convicted murderer Derek Chauvin. You know, that leaves out a lot, of course, and they go into Colin Kaepernick and, issues in the black community, but the way in which media does, not the way in which people do, because if you ask the average person, you get a much different response. And it used to be that Hollywood and media were more in tune. I won't say they were ever really all that in tune, but there was a time in which there was at least a good segment of the media establishment that was very in tune with what people actually knew and thought, and they wouldn't necessarily push that, but they would kind of acknowledge it in their own way. And now it's so disconnected and so tone deaf, because a lot of what Hollywood does is they look at Twitter and sort of gauge, what do people feel about this or that, and they go with it. So you have a lot of people now going down the Twitter rabbit hole on issues like what happened to George Floyd, ignoring everything that happened in the trial, ignoring everything that happened that day, and saying that, the narrative says, well, this is a noble fight for the poor, oppressed minorities in this country. But really, it's way more complicated than that. But you can't sell a complicated narrative when you're selling a movie or a TV show. Ergo, it gets simplified and pushed in the sound bites so it could sell you more time on air. And really, when you look back on the George Floyd incident, if you ever look into it, you can see that it's not as cut and dry as, a guy set out to murder a dude because of the color of his skin. But I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole again. You could look at some of my older videos for that, probably on BitChute and Rumble, because YouTube doesn't want you to talk about important issues. But here's how it's actually impacting Hollywood. I know, Joan's all about the important issues. Here's how it's impacting Hollywood. 127 TV episodes pushed Black Lives Matter, defund the police in a year since George Floyd's death. That's a lot of episodes. And, fortunately, there's not a hell of a lot of people watching television anymore. Television's going down the tubes because who watches TV shows when you get a service and you can binge watch an entire season of The Boys, or you can watch movies whenever you want. You can watch half a movie, you can watch part of it, you can watch YouTube videos, you can watch anything. So TV isn't what it was. It's not, it used to be you could watch television even back as recently, here you go, Joe, come here. As recently as Seinfeld, everybody was sort of on the same page. Now you've got all these disparate communities, and they've been atomized, and I've talked about this before, but this particular community, the mainstream community, is political. It's pushing a particular narrative for political purposes. And this is part of the reason why people aren't watching TV. Number one, they don't want to be preached to. Here, I think that's Black Lightning in the upper left-hand corner doing the Black Power salute. And you could argue, well, that's appropriate for the character. Maybe, but do you really want to see that in your superhero show all the time? Maybe you do. Is there an audience for it? I don't think so. I mean, if Batwoman's ratings are any indication, I don't think you want too much preaching in your superhero TV shows. SVU in the upper right-hand corner, that's always been very preachy about various issues, but, they've also been wrong on occasion. And really, it was supposed to be a broad spectrum of what's going on in the world, not taking a particular side, per se. And when you look at the side that a lot of the politics are on, in terms of the liberals who make most of this stuff, and you look at a show like SVU, which takes place in New York, and the city's just so corrupt and horrible things happen, well, you have to ask yourself, is that partly because of the horrible Democrats that run those cities? Bill de Blasio. But Black Lives Matter is itself a real problem. And anyone who's done even a tiny bit of research in it can tell you that the organization is rife with problems. And you don't have to look any further than one of the founders of Black Lives Matter buying multiple mansions and complaining that her neighborhood is racist somehow. Where'd she get all that money? And why is she a Marxist? And why did Act Blue collect all the money for BLM? These are questions that, unfortunately, people are too busy virtue signaling to really think about. They're too busy saying, oh, please don't call me a racist. Please, I support Black Lives Matter. And that's what these TV shows are, because they can exploit that feeling. They can say, well, you're not watching this show about Black Lives Matter? I mean, this is an important episode. You're not a racist, are you? But Black Lives Matter has massive problems, and here's one of them. This is Breitbart. Breaking news reveals Amazon's Black Lives Matter donation tied to convicted terrorist. Well, yeah, essentially. This is Sue Rosenberg, I believe her name is, right? Susan Rosenberg. And she is a convicted terrorist. I mean, that's not hyperbole. She is. And we talked about her before. She and some of her compadres blew up, actually set off a bomb in the Capitol building. There's the picture there from the results. Now, no one was killed, but her and her group, they were eventually caught with hundreds of pounds of explosives and she was sentenced to 58 years in prison. And she would still be there, except in 2001, as Bill Clinton was out the door, he pardoned her. And now, well, if you go to Wikipedia, otherwise what I call the Marxist Dictionary, she has been on the board of colleges, or she's been teaching in colleges, which she's been kicked out because people rose a stink early on. But now she's part of, what's the name of the place? A Thousand Currents nonprofit foundation, which raises funds and provides institutional support to grassroots groups, including BLM. And she is pretty open about her views, and the Marxist agenda. Um, I think someone like her would be more than happy to see the state topple. Um, but the point is, should this be a person trusted with money? Should this be a person running a nonprofit that's supposedly going to help? I mean, you assume Black Lives Matter. If they collect money from you, well, I'm donating money to poor black people in bad situations, maybe to get people out of prison or whatnot. I'm not donating money to tear down the state, to tear down the country I live in, to defund the police so my neighborhood's less safe. But unfortunately, that seems exactly where all that money's going. And, you know, that Hollywood continues to push these sort of vague narratives without actually looking into it, like a lot of their news divisions seem to do, is very problematic, because there are people out there who they just believe it. They just say, well, it's on TV. Yeah, that's like assuming there'd be somebody to go, wait a minute, this is wrong, and now I'm going to sue you and you're going to lose lots of money, or this is wrong and that's against the law to report something. Well, it's not against the law to lie to you. And it's really hard to sue someone over misinformation. You got to prove that you somehow lost money on it. So, yeah, you're being lied to, I think. And George Floyd, his death has turned into a narrative. Whatever happened, it's been exploited to get people to get on board with this. And this is the kind of, in my view, unsavory characters that are involved with the money. Someone who would plan a bomb in a government building and set it off. Now, you might agree with that, and I'm sure there are plenty of Black Lives Matter activists that do. But you have to understand that if you don't agree with that, well, how are you going to separate your donation that you want to just do wonderful charity work that normal people want to do from people like this who are actively engaged in toppling the state? Anyhow, food for thought, Hollywood. Hollywood, I think you should just stay out of politics for the most part. And if you're going to skim it over, or, you know, if you're going to write an in-depth article in Variety like this, do your homework. And if you're not going to do your homework, well then, you know, call it out for what it is. And don't push some sort of narrative. But I can't expect these guys to be honest. I can't expect Variety to check the power structure in America. They are the power structure. They are part of the elite. They work for the studios. Asking Variety to put the government in check would be like to ask Variety to put the studios in check. Ain't gonna happen. But that's Hollywoke.